This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, CJ Stroud.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharyson, and this is episode 951 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by Underdog. Thanks for tuning in. Underdog is a great place to play fantasy sports this Thanksgiving. Right now in the lobby, you can check out the Turkey. It's a $5 entry with $200,000 in prizes. It's all centered around one of the best slates of the year, the Thanksgiving slate. You can check that out and more by heading to UnderdogFantasy.com or downloading the app. If you've never played there, make sure you sign up with promo code LATEROUND. That'll get you a nice deposit offer, as well as my rest of season rankings, which I'm still updating every Tuesday. That's UnderdogFantasy.com, promo code LATEROUND. Now let's get to these trends. Trend 1 this week is about the Tampa Bay backfield. Bucky Irving, for the first time this season, outsnapped Rachaad White against the Giants. He ran 20 routes to White's 11. His running back rush share wasn't anything to write home about at just 43%. It's actually his lowest in 5 weeks. But it was good seeing the Buccaneers use him more as a receiver. He had a 20% target share. Now, I don't think this means the Buccaneers will use Irving if they face a negative game script. That's probably Rachaad White's role still. But as I've been saying on the show, the Bucs have a pretty cakewalk schedule rest of season. They're going to face a lot of positive game scripts. And once again, that's going to benefit Bucky Irving. We're going to want to watch Tyrone Tracy's usage as we enter Week 13. He had another fumble, and that was likely the key reason that we saw him hit just a 41% snap share against the Buccaneers. That was his lowest mark since Week 4. He did hit a double-digit percentage target share for the first time in a month. That was thanks to a final drive during garbage time. But that snap share, it needs to rise in order for Tracy to hit the ceiling that we know that he can hit down the stretch. So Jonathan Brooks made his debut for the Panthers on Sunday, and he played a grand total of 5 snaps. Now what's hilarious about that usage is that obviously it means that Chuba Hubbard played a lot, and he did. Chuba had a solid 89% running back rush share and a 15% target share. And his snap share was 88%. That was his second highest snap share of the season. So the game that Jonathan Brooks is finally healthy for, the Panthers give Chuba Hubbard his second highest snap share of the season. Go figure. I think we can keep treating Hubbard as a must start until we see things change. I don't think we're going to see this big of a disparity moving forward, but at this point, considering how they've been so slow with Brooks' injury, you have to assume that Chuba is easily their top back rest of season. I had Jacoby Myers as a buy on the 15 Transaction Show a couple of weeks ago, but I noted that his immediate schedule was tough. But the late season schedule was absolutely there. And most importantly, his usage had been good without Devontae Adams. Well, I never expected him to see a 33% target share and score 22 PPR points against the Denver Broncos. Results over process, right? Myers, though, has been getting great usage. Since Devontae Adams left town, Myers has averaged a target share per game rate of 29%. He scored almost 15 PPR points per game. And don't forget, in the fantasy playoffs, the Raiders get the Falcons, Jags, and Saints. He should be able to produce when it matters most for you, regardless of who's under center. Trey McBride's lack of touchdowns is absolutely wild. Tight ends this season have averaged a touchdown in every 22 targets. Trey McBride hasn't scored a receiving touchdown this year. He has 80 targets. And McBride's obviously better than just the ordinary tight end. According to PFF's expected touchdowns formula, McBride has played 3.5 touchdowns below expectation this year. Right now, when looking at PPR points per game, McBride's in third with 14.2. Had he scored 3 touchdowns, I'm not even rounding up here with his expected touchdowns. Had he scored 3 touchdowns, his average would be 16.3 fantasy points per game. He'd be having an elite season at tight end. Let's hope regression hits down the stretch. I saw an interesting tweet from friend of the show Josh Norris of Underdog, where he noted that DJ Moore's ADOT has been 1.9 yards since the coordinator shift in Chicago. Moore does indeed have a 1.9 average at the target over his last 2. Week 11, it was 0.9. Week 12, 2.9. From weeks 1 to 10, Moore had an ADOT of 9.4. They're clearly trying to get the ball in his hands because he's a playmaker. And those lower ADOTs have led to 100% catch rates in back-to-back weeks. He's caught all 14 of his targets. Now, he'll likely need to break one in order to hit a really high ceiling at this rate. But this new deployment is definitely going to raise his floor in PPR formats. We've already seen that happen. He scored 14 and 27 PPR points over his last two. Before that, he had 4 straight games where he didn't even hit 8 PPR points. Now, speaking of lower ADOTs, CeeDee Lamb had an average depth of target of 3.8 in week 12. That's according to PFF. That was his lowest of the season. Over the last 3 weeks without Dak Prescott, his ADOT has been 5.8. That's almost 4 yards lower than what it was with Dak. Now, I actually don't see this as a bad thing for his fantasy value. We typically want down the field targets, but with questionable quarterback play, being peppered with easier looks can be a great way to maintain fantasy value. It's not totally unlike what's going on with DJ Moore. It's just that Moore's situation isn't only the quarterback. But I see this as a good thing for Lamb overall. I think he can still easily be a top 20 guy at wide receiver rest of season. I actually think we should be viewing him in PPR formats as sort of a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. The Eagles are a very run-heavy team, but they're pacing to do something kind of historic. I always date my data back to 2011. It's sort of a point in time where the NFL started to change its ways, but also it's around the time I started analyzing fantasy football. But since 2011, only 2 teams had a pass-to-rush touchdown rate that was below 40%, meaning fewer than 40% of their offensive touchdowns came from a passing touchdown. Those teams were the 2020 Patriots, who only scored 32 touchdowns, so it was easier to have that kind of weird ratio. And the other one was the 2016 Buffalo Bills. That was a team led by Rex Ryan and quarterbacked by Tyrod Taylor. The Eagles right now are at a rate of 37%. Just 37% of their touchdowns have come from the pass. That's because Saquon Barkley's playing out of his mind, and they've got the tush push. Now, the Eagles have been lower in that statistic with Jalen Hurts. That's not surprising. But not this low. They haven't had Barkley either, sure, and they've been more run-heavy this year than other seasons. But I still would expect a little bit of regression over the next month. There was some hope that with Mike Evans back, the Buccaneers might throw Jalen McMillan in the slot more. That's his natural position. That's what he played in college. And while McMillan did run the most routes for Tampa Bay on Sunday, Sterling Shepard was the primary slot guy in Week 12. In fact, according to PFF, McMillan's slot rate in Week 12, it was lowest on the Buccaneers. He trailed even Mike Evans. I'm just afraid the ceiling is never going to really hit for McMillan until the Bucs really switch things up. Because like I said, in my eyes, he's not playing his natural role. The last trend this week is about CJ Stroud. Stroud has really struggled this year in fantasy football. He scored 20 points in just one game. That's about 8% of his overall games. Last year, he scored 20 or more points in 33% of his games. Now, a few things are happening here. Last season, Stroud had an average depth of target that was a full yard higher than where he's at this year. And his completion percentage was actually a little bit higher too. And that's kind of counterintuitive. It means he's not connecting well despite hypothetically easier throws. And we're seeing him suffer on deep balls, which kind of explains this. According to PFF, Stroud has 3 deep ball touchdowns this year. Those are on throws of 20 plus air yards. He had 9 of them last year. And then all the while, the Texans have been more balanced with how they're scoring their touchdowns. Stroud didn't have an unsustainable touchdown rate last year, but the Texans did throw for 27 touchdowns versus running for just 10. With the emergence of Joe Mixon, that ratio this season is 14-13. I still think there's a chance that we get some usability from Stroud down the stretch because there are some okay matchups in there. And Nico Collins is back too. But statistically, that's largely the reason why we're seeing what we're seeing with CJ Stroud. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you yet subscribe to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter at LateRoundQB, and I'm on Blue Sky as well with the exact same handle. Thanks for listening, everyone. Like I said, you got one more episode this week. It's the Sleepers episode. That'll be out later today. I'll talk to you then.